Well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Following the success of our last series, we decided we'd launch a second. Clearly, in the Isle of Man, there's a lot of businesses struggling with the issues that the COVID pandemic has brought. So the next series is about preparing for the new reality. Potentially, that's a term people are already sick of. It's being used a lot. But over the coming weeks, we will explore different ways that businesses can change their business models, think about how their consumer behaviors will change, and adapt their businesses accordingly, and hopefully get them into a state where they're fit for purpose over the next business cycle. Just a couple of pieces of admin. If at any time you feel like you're losing the connection with us, please, there will be a reconnect button in the top that will refresh you and bring you back into the live room. Equally, if you can't stay on for the whole time, this will run for just over 45 minutes, we think. But feel free to access the replay, which is on our new reality portal, on kpmg.co.im/webinars. We want to make this as interactive as possible as we go through. So it's great to see that some of you already found the chat area, and good morning to everyone who's been very polite. And feel free to send some questions in there, particularly as we go through it. I would highlight that due to the minister's commitments with Tim Ord yesterday, and the potential that there was for that to overrun into this morning, it is pre-recorded. So whilst you could ask the minister some questions, we would have to get back to you, and we can't do that live today. But certainly we will pass those to the minister, but potentially we'll try and answer them. I'll try and answer them at the end. If you can't find the chat area, there are you should be able to see some 3 red dots on your right hand side of your screen, and that's where you'll be able to access the chat. And then in the future side, you should be able to access the polls as well. So feel free to find that now. So just go through the agenda today. Really, we just covered the introduction. One of the things I will talk to you about is the macro and business signals framework that KPMG have devised, and it's really a framework really there to try and help businesses understand where they currently stand. And then we'll talk about business as usual versus the achieving the new reality. And then without further ado, we'll hand over to the minister, who will take us through his views on the economy now and in the future. With then Russell Kelly, my fellow partner, talking us through, taking the minister through some questions, and then we'll wrap up. So I'd like to start with our framework. Throughout this entire crisis, we've consistently used what we call our 4 R's. The 4 R's are reaction, our resilience, recovery, and new reality. I'm not going to talk through all the words on the pages that are coming up now. The framework is available on our website, and I would encourage each of you to download it. It's only a couple of pages, and it is a handy guide to walk you through where potentially the economy is at, where the business is at, and certainly where the pandemic is at. I think it's fair to say they're all moving at different paces. So the pandemic is probably a step ahead of where the economy is due to some natural lagging, and then potentially the businesses are even lagging behind the economy. So, for example, if you look at the recovery areas around the pandemic, the virus spread decreases. Well, of course, we've seen that here, with this week feeling a little unusual, actually, as you drive past and you're not queuing to get into shops anymore, and you can start to socialize a lot more freely. So clearly, from a pandemic side, we're certainly in recovery phase. I don't think we're really yet in new reality just yet. One of the indicators we talk about with new reality is you're truly back to normal. Clearly, with borders remaining shut, and of course, Tim Ord were debating that yesterday as to how they're going to move forward on that. We're not quite in that new reality stage yet from dealing with the pandemic. Similarly, then, if you look at the economic side and you look at the resilience, the economy impact is now evident in lagging indicators, which we've seen. The decline is continuing, which we have seen, and we're not quite at a stage yet where the economy has stopped declining, has started to stabilize, unemployment rates have stopped, and whilst consumer confidence remains low, these things are all still deteriorating, unfortunately, in the wake of the pandemic. So there's a great example of where you can see that actually the pandemic, from an Isle of Man perspective, may be perhaps bordering between recovery and starting to adapt to a new world, but certainly the economy is very much back in resilience mode and still really managing some of that uncertainty. As the minister, I'm sure we'll talk about, the support schemes are probably masking the labour market situation, particularly with unemployment. It'll be interesting to see when some of those get lifted and the support gets slowly pulled back, what happens to unemployment, unfortunately, on the island, which is already at significantly high levels compared to the historic trends. And then when you look at businesses, for us, recovery is about when the business is seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, is acclimated, I guess, to, if you can, to the current environment and sort of finding ways to operate through lockdown. So actually, some businesses are doing that really well, whereas actually some are still back in that resilience phase, taking stock and almost firefighting, doing everything they can to actually just stay in business. I think on the island, I think what's quite clear is there's a clear division between the domestic economy and the international economy. And I'd imagine the international is very much in recovery, with much of the domestic still in some of that resilience mode, where they're still firefighting and still struggling to repair their balance sheets. Of course, international business need to be mindful of the global recession, which many economists are talking about could be the worst in 300 years. Although being a relatively positive guy, I do feel that sometimes we can talk ourselves into these recessions, and actually it'd be good for people to start talking about how to trade their way out of it. But again, this slide and the next slide that I'll just run through now is available on our website, and I would encourage you to take a look at it in more detail. I think what's really important for us is, and we've identified 7 key areas for businesses to think about. Obviously, this is relatively generic, but we think it can pretty much apply to most businesses, even the financial services ones, which tend to be a little different. But for us, what's really important is, as businesses enter that recovery phase, enter that period where they think about how they move forward, it's really important that they keep an eye on that new reality. So you adapt your processes to changes in consumer behavior, to how your staff want to work. KPMG have just done their own survey, and we've done a couple during COVID, and it's very clear that the bulk of our staff want to change the way that they work, and they won't necessarily want to come into the office. Having got 4 floors on Athol Street, that presents some interesting challenges for us as a business, and I'm sure all businesses will be facing these challenges as we go ahead. So there's adapting to the way staff want to work, which is around effective business operating models. But actually, more fundamentally, is our business model relevant to the post-pandemic future? And actually, have businesses started to redefine that? So for us, you're in a recovery phase when you've started to redefine that, and you're starting to execute on that. Similarly, I think digitization, we've seen that. We've seen small retail, even on the Isle of Man, going online for the first time, and with often providing social media offerings, and really just changing the way they operate. I'll touch on it later on, but clearly some of those things businesses have to decide on whether they are fit for the new reality or whether they were just there to get through the crisis. I think I've probably given enough detail there. It'd be really interesting to see where you think you are with your business. So what we're going to put up on the screen very shortly is a poll, and it'd be really interesting to see where you're at. whilst you're doing that, interestingly, the KPMG UK had a similar webinar. We did promote it, so some of you may well have seen it. But that was interesting yesterday. We asked the same questions to the UK businesses 2 days ago it was. And so it'd be quite interesting to compare the results. But I'll just leave it for a second and let people respond. So we're just ending the poll now. What's really interesting to see these results and how they compare to the UK. I think what's great to see from my perspective is that I think perhaps the Isle of Man business community is a little bit more realistic than perhaps some of the results that came through the UK yesterday. So yesterday, in the UK, the results were really quite different. There were a lot more businesses who thought they were in the new reality. Given the UK economy and pandemic is very much behind us in this, that's a little surprising to us, and that was an unexpected result. So clearly those businesses are feeling quite confident, whereas I think actually we are a lot more focused on really what is happening here and now, and perhaps understand the impact of this virus on us because we are a smaller business community. Interestingly, the balance between around recovery and resilience is about the same, which is interesting, but it is a shift out of the new reality, which for me actually these poll results probably mirror what I'd expect. Looking at who's on, we do seem to have a relatively good balance between international and domestic, so that's definitely showing through as well. But we'll analyze these trends and no doubt push them through social media. But I've got no doubt that those that are still feeling in resilience mode are probably more linked to the domestic economy. So what I'd like to go on and talk about now is really a bit of a debate, actually. It'll be interesting on the chat to see where you think you're at. There appear to be two camps forming around whether the world going forward will be this new reality. Will it really look and feel really quite different to how it's been before? Or actually, is it just business as usual? And actually, what's happened is that COVID has essentially accelerated a few trends. So just take business as usual. I think we're seeing major world economies are diverging. Certainly, they're quite overstretched from a fiscal monetary policies. We've seen huge spending, obviously locally, but also particularly some staggering numbers in the developing countries, or developed countries, sorry. I'm actually seeing quite a lot of social discontent. There's still a lot of noise around around climate. There are increases in cyber attacks, and of course, with the Floyd situation out of the US, which became an international issue, we've seen lots of things around human rights as well. If you reflect back last year, did we see the same things pretty much? Actually, I think arguably you could say we did. So some would argue that actually there's a bit of deja vu happening here. Whilst the scenery may look slightly different, actually we're still on exactly the same path. Perhaps some of those issues have just been brought to the fore. So many economists are talking about these macro trends have accelerated. Productivity is redefined. There is more automation, there is more technological displacement, and actually that was happening before. What's quite interesting is actually as you increase your technology, as you increase your automation, actually the labor market and the falls down slightly on the priority list, because actually you're relying more and more on technology, more and more on automation, and that's certainly something that the education system and everyone else needs to look out for, and making sure that the labor force is fit for the new workplace. Again, not something new that we were talking about that pre-COVID. Market economics is redefined. I've called it, protect your own, but I think we've seen with the US and China, there are, and also Brexit, actually, we've already seen countries wanting to go their own way and start to move away from working together. And I think one thing that will come out of COVID is supply chain location. I think we saw well publicized the issues the NHS had in the UK with trying to get some PPE and out of Turkey. Can I see a situation where actually some of that PPE will be made in the UK going forward or closer to shores? Absolutely. So I think there will be a change going forward around the balance between business resilience and the ability to continue in a crisis versus cost efficiency. So again, that will lead to bringing other services closer to our shores. And then the purpose of a company, for us, that is being redefined and has always been redefined, but I think it will be really redefined right now as a result of COVID. Governments are firefighting lots of local issues, fiscal stimulus, trying to recapitalize essentially economies for the first time. They really never had to do that. But meanwhile, employees, our staff, our customers, and the public are expecting companies to continue to address some of those key topics. So if you take sustainability, reskilling labor forces for the future, those government subsidies that some businesses have relied on probably aren't going to be there because the government simply won't be able to afford them. But actually, the general public and employees expect businesses to carry on with those. And so they'll have to do that by themselves. You compare that to the new reality. We've tried to understand the new reality or help businesses understand the new reality, and we've put it into 3 buckets. So there's a financial resilience. Are you set up with enough flexibility in your liquidity arrangements, in the way you earn your income, that you are resilient and financially resilient going forward for these new markets? And then clearly you have to consider the commercial resilience. So what are those changes in consumer trends? How are markets changing? How is demand changing? The just-in-time model clearly hasn't quite worked for the auto industry and other key sectors because they relied on constant flow of trade. Well, the crisis has shown that might not always be the case. So I'm sure there's plenty of people looking at how they change commercially, the way that they've set themselves up. And all of this is ultimately then feeds into the middle box, which is around actually how do they operate? And are their operations set up to manage that financial resilience, but also to really deal with the new commercial resilience? One thing we've got, and this is a flow chart to really, or a decision tree really, to try and help businesses understand how to move forward. This is taken from a piece of thought leadership again on our portal. So there are pages and pages that sit behind this. But really, this diagram really tries to help businesses go through in a simple way, think about what have we done during the crisis? What of that was pre-crisis? And what of that should we take forward? So not everything that you did pre-crisis will necessarily be fit for purpose in the new world with new consumer trends. But actually, let's be clear, many businesses will have operated for many years successfully based on how it's behaved before. And actually, the trading conditions within the crisis are not necessarily the norm. And then there are things that were put into place just specifically to deal with the crisis. And for me, I take perhaps say some of the small retail examples. Mentioning that some of them have gone online, some of them have done social media strategies, and actually some of those have done them for the first time. But actually, those strategies have worked, and they are potentially good for the future market. So perhaps some of that should stay. These are all questions that the directors and businesses should be asking themselves. And for us, this is all part of that recovery phase, but anticipating the new reality, if you remember my slide from a couple of slides ago. Just to pick out a couple of examples before we hand over to the minister to think about, and this is really food for thought. There will be some of these actions that you had pre-crisis, some that you decided to stop during the crisis. But actually, there may well be, as bullet A here, there may be some of those you need to bring back. However, we would suggest you need to bring them back, again, thinking about, Are you utilizing technology in the best way when you bring some of those older processes back online? And then similarly, there are some of those processes which you had before, which you stopped during the crisis, but do you really need to bring them back on? Did they add value? Were they in fact non-core, or were they down to a legacy way of looking at things? And actually is now a good time to clear out some of the dead wood, either in your processes or possibly even your product lines. And then really things that you did that are new to you, new that you introduced during the crisis, that you didn't have there before. Well, how do you encompass those in the way forward? Should you encompass them in the way forward? And that's what really C&D is really about. Is it sustainable for you to do it the way you've done it over the last couple of months going forward? Or actually, do you need to modify that? Some of these new processes and approaches to your business may well have come out of necessity. So are they really fit for the new world and taking forward? What I'll do now is hand over to the minister. And again, thank you very much to him for giving his time. And I'll let you take it forward, Treasury Minister.
So thank you very much, Simon. So what we're going to look at today is where we are in terms of our economic response framework and what we are looking at in terms of planning the new future for the island based on what we can see as the opportunities resulting from this pandemic. So the first slide really gives you an overview of how we see the picture from a Treasury perspective developing, and it's pretty clear at this stage in terms of our policy response that the easiest way to manage that is to really put it into the phases. The initial phase now of both the support that we're offering and how that support is continued over the next couple of months, what we need to do to transition the island over the next 3 to 9 months, and what we need to do to recover, capitalize on a recovery, and also what we need to do and where we need to invest to provide the framework for the island to build on the opportunities that have presented themselves and the clear recognition that we need to move forward as an island and bring about a new vision, a new economic vision for the future. So what we're really working on at the moment is understanding, obviously, the effectiveness of the response that we've presented. And as you know, we are now at a position where social distancing has been removed from the island. So broadly speaking, we're in a very good position from a health perspective. That means we can really now focus on the economy. What we need to do is to work out now critically the direct support mechanisms, the direct life support that government is giving to business, how that is effectively removed and in what format that is removed. And primarily we'll be talking about there the salary support scheme, which I know now has been widely utilised by businesses that are the key sectors that needed it. And of course the social support that's being offered through the Manx Earnings Replacement Allowance, the Social Security. So how we lift those and in what context, and how we provide support in this sort of immediate next 3 months or so is a critical question that we are currently working to resolve. And then we need to understand what we need to do as we move from containment to recovery, and in other words, this transition period, how we provide the economy, businesses with the right framework to help them through that transition, to help businesses both develop new business plans and broadly support the local domestic economy. And then in that period beyond that, 9 months plus, clearly we need to be delivering on a broadly a new economic vision. And again, we are working out what type of investments government needs to be leading on and bringing forward to make a new economic vision a reality for the island. So again, you can see that how I've just sort of described that more clearly in these slides. So we have the immediate response, which we've determined as the support, provision of liquidity, solvency for business and income support. Cash clearly remains, cash flow and assets, cash assets remain at the forefront of the need for many businesses at the moment. And as we get the economy open, I guess government's role will be to try and get out of providing the direct support through the salary support and to try and provide a much broader framework. And I think partly that will also have to be understanding what sector support is delivered and in what form. Clearly, arguably the salary support schemes at the moment, for example, could potentially work out to be unfair for some businesses if we just work on a turnover basis for application. So also within our thinking is a need for fairness. Certainly it's not going to be right for us to be supporting and encouraging weaker businesses in the sector versus other businesses perhaps who have grasped the need to deliver their services in a new way. So those issues very much need to be solved as we continue to provide this immediate support. And then moving through into the sort of short to medium term, more around the stimulus for the economy. We need to be, as a government, ensuring that we are encouraging the sort of consumption investment and the strategic support that is necessary, again, to make sure that we are doing what we need to keep or give the economy every opportunity to breathe. So, for example, the easiest example for that is going to be the capital infrastructure projects, redefining those, looking at prioritising those and getting those quick wins, I guess, out into the marketplace. So, for example, the construction industry and the businesses that surround that will be able to get to those schemes, and obviously that will sustain jobs and employment in those industries and that sector. And then I guess around the rest of the private sector, we need to make sure that we have those strategic support schemes in terms of grants, access to capital, etc., that are relevant and necessary for businesses who are either looking to sustain themselves during this period, and again we need to make sure that money is being distributed on a fair basis, or for businesses who are looking to expand their horizons, find new business income streams, or divest themselves of their current business model and move to completely new business models. So that will be important in the short to medium term. And then obviously in the medium to longer term, again, this will be about making sure that the island as a whole is in a position to capitalise on what we regard as the new future, the new economic future and vision for the island. And clearly, we're doing this at the moment in a position where the economy and the economic position is somewhat unclear, and we can see from the sort of performances that we're starting to see in the stock markets, there's a sort of up and down curve, if you like. One day everybody's quite bullish about the future, and then the following day we do get quite a lot of bad news. So. And you will see actually that this kind of lack of clarity is reflected in the actions probably of our near neighbour across the United Kingdom. Rishi Sunak has consistently now over the last few weeks begun to push back in terms of making declarations of how the budget is going to work, the public sector is going to work going forward, where he needs to lock in the long-term funding. And I think that position is probably relatively reasonable one to take, given the uncertainties that still exist. And of course, we can now start to see some positions unwinding. Certainly in the last few days, we've starting to see in the leisure industry, in terms of businesses making clear that they're going to have significant redundancies on their hands, or indeed putting themselves into the sort of liquidation positions, and we've already seen that to a certain degree in manufacturing. So I think, broadly speaking, from an Isle of Man perspective, we still have some uncertainty in front of us as to what the true economic position is here on the island, and partly the recognition and realization of that will come with the position that we take in terms of direct support. So the salary support that we're putting into the marketplace at the moment, and indeed even the sort of social support, if you like, in terms of the mirror, potentially is masking what we might be looking at in terms of our unemployment position and broadly the overall strength of the economy. So there's still some way to go on that. And what we now need to do, and what we're going to intend to do in July when I come to deliver a budget update, is really put out very clearly the roadmap that we see in front of us, the opportunities that we see in front of us in terms of the economic future, and also what we see in terms of providing clarity for those stages I've talked about, i.e. what the Treasury and government will need to do in the short, medium and longer term. And that's really what we're going to lay out. A lot of work is going into that. There has been engagement, as many people who may be listening to this will know, with the business community. We've engaged with Tynwald, and we've also engaged with the Council of Ministers. So both Treasury and the Department for Enterprise, who've had to work incredibly closely now, probably more closely than we've ever worked before, in terms of determining and taking action in terms of responses to the crisis. We will, Treasury will lay that out. I will lay that out along with Lawrence Skelly in July. And what we will do as that roadmap starts to unfurl, we'll have to clearly respond at various points along that journey. But that's pretty much it, Russell, and really, happy to take your questions, which I'm sure you've got plenty.
Okay, well, thank you, Alf, for running through that for us, and I think people will find that very insightful to understand where Treasury are in their thinking and where Treasury have been in their thinking over the last 3 months of lockdown. But as you said, it's an important phase now as we're moving out of the reaction and containment phases to transition ourselves forward into what is hopefully a positive recovery for our economy here. But just looking back, do you have any inkling or feeling as to how the Isle of Man economy has fared over the period of lockdown? I'm not looking for sort of actual statistics, but just roughly a general sentiment.
So I mean, we haven't had any official statistics. They haven't been presented to me to give me any formal recognition or understanding of the exact percentages or exact figures. But broadly, I think and I believe that we took the right actions to give the economy the support that it needed to get through this. We spent millions of pounds on the salary support scheme, a few £1 million on the earnings support, and of course around that we also had other business support schemes as well. So broadly, I think that actually we've got through to this point with most people intact in one way or another. I think the critical question is what is going to unveil itself as we move forward in the next few weeks. And I think in the last few days we've already seen some signals that in one or two areas, particularly the most affected areas in leisure and hospitality, where of course with the borders shut, we've got no critical earning capacity for those areas, and also obviously given the fact that they've been shut down now for so long and they're the last effectively to open, we've already seen that there is some weakness coming through, and a few businesses are starting to declare their hands and shut their doors. So we've got some considerable way to go to properly understand that picture, but it's been tough for a lot of people, but broadly, I think that we have done enough to sustain ourselves through this period.
Yes, thank you. I would agree with that. We are regularly taking the pulse of industry as a firm, and most people feel the measures introduced by government have been positive and successful. And just turning to those stimulus packages that you have put in place, has take-up been as you expected, or more requests, or fewer requests than what you thought you would get?
Yeah, I think we go into these things with just a broad range of scenarios in our hand. It's been incredibly difficult. I mean, one of the problems with this crisis is the lack of vision in terms and understanding of exactly what situation people are going to find themselves in, how long the crisis is going to go on for, how deep the impact is going to be, what the consequences of other people's actions are. Suffice to say, the delivery and the take-up on the support has been within our scenario planning, well within our scenario planning, in fact. I think, broadly speaking, and if you split the economy into the sort of local domestic economy and then the sort of outward-facing side of our economy, the financial services sector, the digital economy, I think actually, it has been contained to a large degree within that domestic economy. So actually the support probably has been slightly less than we may well have initially envisaged in a worst case scenario planning. But one of the critical elements within this is that there was the direct support, if you like, in terms of these schemes, but there was the indirect support that was being given and allowed through VAT deferrals and through tax deferrals. And that picture, we've seen some initial figures around that. I think I've declared already that there was £11 million we had deferred of VAT in that sort of first month or so. Haven't seen the rest of that picture coming through yet, Russell, and that's going to be the critical element. What is the revenue stream of government going to look like for the end of the financial year next year in March 2021? And we put some scenarios around that, and this is going to cost the economy. It's going to cost the government's finances. It's still, as I said, it won't be probably now October, November before we properly understand where we are with that. I can see the direct cost, if you like, in terms of support mechanisms. I think I'm a bit loath to give figures out. I gave quite a few figures out at the beginning of this crisis, and we will see how true they come. But I think roughly speaking, now £100 million or so forecast of direct support, probably till the end of July into August. But then obviously, as I said, we'll determine the sort of income levels and the overall cost probably October, November before we get a proper handle on that.
Yes, and £100 million is a significant level of support to put into an economy the size of what we have here in the Isle of Man. And I think it's very important that we are focused on how we reignite the economy and stimulate it going forward. So how do you see the stimulus going forward differing from what you've done in the past with your support packages? Will it be more sector focused? Will it be more loan or over grant, or what do you see coming out? Do you see slightly different structure to the support going forward?
Well, I think partly in answering that, one has to recognise that unlike previous crises before, which have been caused purely by market conditions, this has effectively been caused by the direct actions, not only of the Manx government, but the way that governments have handled this around the world. So if we translate that back to the Isle of Man, I think so. You've therefore got to ask a number of questions in solving that conundrum. What role does government play in terms of direct support to businesses versus the providing the perhaps what you might call the policy support in terms of the access to funding to help push the island forward in a strategic direction. That's basically the conundrum we're still dealing with. So I think the outcome that we're going to get is, or moving towards, is probably an understanding of what we need to provide in direct support, and that will have to probably come on a sector basis, because we don't want to distort the market. And as I go back to this competitive element, what you might end up with otherwise is two relatively similar businesses finding that one's actually getting support and one's not, and one is getting support having not changed anything or not fought in the market in a competitive and fair way to either change their business model or reach out to the community, and another has done that successfully yet. So we'll distort the competitive fairness, I guess, of the marketplace. But yes, some form of direct support, I think, will have to come in on a sector basis. We'll determine that. But longer term, more broadly over the transition period, I think we need to be relatively fair in understanding the ability of businesses to access either grants or loans, probably around working capital of some form, that they will justifiably need, because the impact over the period of time we're talking about, the 3 months or so during the heat of this crisis, has been so severe. They need that capital to regain the momentum, and or they need it because actually they can see a different future for their business and they need to transition. So I think, yes, getting cash and cash flow and access to businesses will be very, very important. And then also we need to define, I guess, from the government's perspective more broadly, how we influence change towards, as I said, this new future that we've identified, that we've picked up from the research. And I guess it's no secret to say, digital technology is at the very heart of that. What we need to do, how we need to speed up both companies' ability to transition if they haven't already, but also lay in place the infrastructure for the island. So there will be a lot of focus around spending there. A lot of feedback has come that we need to speed up our plans in terms of carbon-free future, and obviously you need to take the one of the core themes that's come through, this view that the island has been a very, very safe place now to do business. I think there's a lot we can capitalise, in that respect as well. So those once we've communicated that efficiently and effectively, and had Tynwald approve the vision that we're going to set out, then we need to tie the spending back both in terms of how we support the private sector in delivering that kind of future for the island, how sectors themselves create a new vision, and what we reasonably need to do to provide direct support where we feel that the businesses have been put into a position by government actions that they need that additional now support on a fair and reasonable basis to be able to get themselves to a position where they can now actually stand on their own 2 feet and government can step out. So I think the big difference this time is going to be the way that government is delivering the ability for businesses to access capital.
Okay, yep, that makes a lot of sense, and very, very important to see that change and that focus going forward. I suppose looking forward then to next month, you have a budget update scheduled to the July Tynwald. What sort of things do we expect, or can we expect to see come from that? And looking at the revenue side, the cost side, and then quite importantly, as you set out, the capital spending, because that is an important stimulus that the government put into a number of sectors of our economy. So do you want to maybe give us some thoughts as to what we might expect to see come from the budget update? Yeah,
so it will be a budget update. There will not be significant measures being brought forward in terms of the standard budget measures, anything around taxation or anything in terms of departmental budgetary allocations, if you like. But what we will intend to do is to give the public an overview of the scenarios that we see emerging and the impact of that on government finances. Certainly some areas we can provide a bit more clarity in terms of government commitment to the immediate crisis. I expect to provide some more clarity of broadly where we see departmental problems or overspends coming through it, and perhaps we'd probably be able to paint a bit more of a picture around the government income scenario. But critically, and this will be the important thing, is we need to present this roadmap towards a new economic future for the island. We've got to give confidence to the private sector that there is a roadmap. We need to outline properly the backing, the support that we're going to give to getting everybody on that road in terms of, as we've outlined in this presentation, what short-term measures, and medium-term and longer-term measures we're going to commit to, the kind of funding that we're going to commit to that, and an acceptance. Probably some of those details might need to come, but we absolutely need to give confidence that the short to medium term for this island, this transition phase, then the immediate support that we need is going to be there, and we need to start then getting that out as we start to, in some way remove the plasters that have been on that we put on initially when the crisis revealed itself. So that will be very much the shape and the format, and it really is now all about the economy. Russell, Treasury will be focused, and we will be challenging public spending to deliver for the economy, and that's why things like, for example, the prioritisation of capital infrastructure spending will be very much under our radar, and we will be pushing where possible and where the economy allows for schemes to be quick win schemes to be brought forward, and or schemes to tie in very, very transparently to what we determine as this economic future, particularly around the sort of carbon neutral position, or improving our green credentials, anything around the safe haven, and of course around this new digital future that we're all recognising is presenting ourselves.
Yeah, and certainly the recent awarding of the broadband contract to Manx Telecom for the rollout of fibre is obviously key to that, and the stimulus provided by capital spending is important, as it does flow into the local economy very quickly in most cases. Looking at that and the way forward, do you have a message for the business community? What sort of things do you want to see the business community doing to really try and help the economy come out of the pandemic and really sort of charge forward?
Well, I think that certainly those businesses that have recognised they're in good shape now need to work to build on that opportunity, and I hope they will. So certainly those businesses that digitalise themselves from an outward-facing perspective, that have actually found productivity up, that are benefiting from this, particularly in the tech sector. I still got to understand how financial services is performing, but they need to capitalise, not only capitalise, but also think about their contribution to the local economy as well. So it's absolutely vital that we do recognise now, and I think this pandemic has brought out the value. We do need each other to survive here. So not only government, which has been just as much as fault as anybody else, but local businesses now need to really carefully examine their expenditure, and to see and examine how that can be transferred into local domestic expenditure, where, for example, that's being spent off island with either tech firms that are not based here, or other supply chains. And of course, there's also incumbent in those businesses that are in that supply chain to make sure they're providing value for money, and have to recognise as people have recognised the value of tech and digital, that the competition element needs to be reasonable, balanced and fair, given that people can just go anywhere in the world. I think also those businesses, particularly those in the domestic economy, around the restaurants, pubs, even the hotels, really have got to ask themselves, what sort of vision they have for the future themselves, how they can also, adapt to make sure that they are in the best position. Given that, we think that there's going to be some fundamental changes in the way that people act and behave. So I think a sense of entrepreneurship is going to be critical. I think businesses have got to think about using this opportunity now, using perhaps access to capital that they might not otherwise get, how they could best use that to change their businesses and adapt. So very much quite a holistic approach, I think, from all businesses. And one of the great things that's come out of this, Russell, is really the engagement process that's happened. I think everybody has stuck their hand up and said, actually, we want to help. We want to shape things. We want to talk. We want to communicate. And we need to capitalize on those sorts of strengths, I guess, that have come from the pandemic as an island to really push ourselves forward. So yes, I mean, I think there is going to be a lot of thinking to do in the private sector as to what actions are being taken. And I think that as an island, we need to try and encourage a holistic approach, certainly over the next 12 months, because we can come out of this in a very, very strong position. There's a lot of positives that we can capitalise on, and that's going to be the key.
Yes, I'd agree, and I think we have learnt some important things from the last 3 months from the pandemic period. I think there has been a lot more community spirit. There's been a lot more engagement with local businesses by other local businesses, which I think is important. And as you say, that will be an important part of our recovery, to try and keep the funds we have in our economy circulating within our economy. So I suppose a final question now, as you said at the start, social distancing goes away, and now we're in a different position and really able to go forward. We're preparing for a new reality. So what does that mean to you? What does a new reality mean to you?
I think it's a really good question. I mean, this will tie the new reality will be a recognition that the strengths, both of the strengths that are on offer here, but also the recognition that we need to change much faster as an island. So we need to capitalise on the opportunities that both present itself. We need to digitalise. We need to push on hard with the contracts, for example, that we've got, with telecoms to get this high-speed fibre in. And we need to capitalise on the opportunity now to move forward at a faster pace, in terms of fulfilling our desires and objectives around being carbon neutral and the current report. And we need to maximise and understand now properly how we can take this safe haven that we've got and that we've built, the reactions both of the private sector and the public sector that come together really to provide that, and take that forward. So we need to embrace that. We need to work out how we can continue this spirit that we've got on the island to make it work going forward. I would like to see a new future where the public and the private sector interact much more fluidly, much more quickly between each other, and action happens within the realms of the money available, but that action happens at a much quicker pace. And if that can come out of this crisis and be the new working norm, then I think the island will have every chance of a successful recovery. Because I'm under no illusions, despite all my talk of opportunities and things, the next 6 to 9 months are going to be potentially incredibly tough. We're going to have to steel ourselves in many respects to get through that. Not be surprised that actually, that there could potentially be much higher levels of unemployment than we've had before. But if we can take kind of what I guess I've just described as the basis for solving the problems and creating a better future, then I think we can overcome that, and position ourselves so that come March, April next year, we can really launch into the new era, if you like, in a much better position than we were when we entered into this crisis.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Al, for going through those questions with us today and taking the time to speak to us. hugely valuable, hugely great insights for us. And I do agree that there are challenging times ahead, but hopefully some great opportunities for people to take advantage of as we go forward. So once again, thank you for your time today.
That's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much to the Treasury Minister for giving us his time, and well done, Ross, with your questions. I think we've heard there, and actually, KPMG had heard through talking to their clients and our just broader business community network that actually the business community really want to support those companies on the island that are fit for purpose, have those operating models that will survive perhaps the next decade, as opposed to just the crisis. So we really would encourage everyone to think about that new world and pivot and adapt your business models for the future. Consider the new consumer behaviors, and we'll explore that a little bit further in a future webinar. But actually, take all the opportunities that are available to you, and I'm sure as the Treasury Minister announced, there will be some new opportunities for capital projects, and the government will help you do that. Thank you very much for joining us today. We've kept bang on the hour, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully again on the next webinar series. We will be sending out an email today because I'm aware that a couple of you didn't see the poll results, so we will send those out today. And have a good week. See you soon.